September 1943. A muddy field near Kursk. A German Panzer IV commander, peering through his optics, watched as a T-34, its turret blown off, still advanced, its tracks churning earth. The crew, though likely dead, drove it forward, a ghost of steel. This wasn't just a machine, it was a symbol of a relentless, almost inhuman determination that defied conventional warfare and struck a primal fear into the hearts of German soldiers. To understand how it happened, we must go back to the summer of 1941, when Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, began. The Wehrmacht, fresh from lightning victories across Western Europe, expected a swift campaign, believing the Soviet Union would collapse within weeks, perhaps even days. Their panzer divisions, honed by blitzkrieg tactics in Poland and France, were considered unstoppable, their crews highly trained, experienced, and brimming with confidence. German intelligence, however, had severely underestimated Soviet military capabilities, particularly in armored warfare, and critically, the sheer depth of their industrial capacity and manpower reserves. The initial encounters on the vast, unforgiving plains of the Eastern Front quickly shattered German illusions of an easy triumph. They expected to face an inferior, disorganized enemy, but instead, they met a force that, despite its initial chaos and staggering losses, possessed a brutal resilience and an unexpected technological edge in certain critical areas. The sheer scale of the conflict, far exceeding anything experienced in the West, with its immense distances, extreme weather conditions ranging from scorching summers to brutal winters, and a no-quarter mentality from both sides, began to grind down the German war machine, forcing them into a protracted struggle they were ill-prepared for, both materially and psychologically. The myth of the invincible Wehrmacht, carefully cultivated through years of propaganda and swift victories, began to crack under the immense pressure of the Eastern Front. The specific situation that began to instill a chilling fear in German tank crews was the sudden shocking appearance of the Soviet T-34 medium tank and the KV-1 heavy tank. German Panzer IV and I-4 tanks, which had dominated battlefields in Western Europe, found their armor-piercing shells, typically 7 cm or 5 cm, bouncing harmlessly off the revolutionary sloped armor of the T-34. The T-34's innovative design, featuring a powerful 76.2mm gun, wide tracks for superior mobility in mud and snow, and its sloped armor, which effectively increased its thickness against incoming projectiles, rendered most German anti-tank weapons of 1941 obsolete. The 7mm PK-36 anti-tank gun, a staple of the early German infantry, was quickly nicknamed the door knocker by German soldiers for its utter ineffectiveness against these new Soviet designs, its shells merely denting the T-34's formidable hide. The KV-1, a monstrous heavy tank weighing over 45 tons, was even more terrifying. It was virtually impervious to all but the most powerful German anti-tank weapons of the early war, often requiring concentrated fire from multiple guns, or even direct hits from 80mm flak cannons, usually reserved for anti-aircraft duties, to disable. This profound technological disparity was a devastating psychological blow. German tank crews, accustomed to clear superiority and the ability to dictate terms of engagement, suddenly found themselves outmatched, their advanced tactics often rendered useless against an enemy they could not penetrate. Reports from the front lines spoke of single Soviet tanks holding up entire German divisions, absorbing dozens of hits, sometimes even hundreds, before finally being overwhelmed, often by desperate measures like engineers planting charges directly on the tank's hull under heavy fire. The brutal nature of the Eastern Front, characterized by vast distances, extreme cold in winter, and thick mud in spring, and a fight for total annihilation, amplified these fears. Tank warfare here was not a precise chess match. It was a chaotic, desperate struggle for survival, a meat grinder where every engagement was fought with unparalleled ferocity, and the stakes were existential, often resulting in death or capture, with little hope of mercy. Into this crucible stepped the Soviet tank crews. They were not the highly trained professional soldiers of the German panzer divisions, at least not initially. Many were young, hastily conscripted from factories and farms, often with only rudimentary education, and given minimal training before being thrown into the inferno of combat. Yet, they became the embodiment of Soviet resistance, their machines extensions of their unwavering will. They were often poorly equipped, operating tanks with rudimentary radios, limited visibility through narrow slits and periscopes, and cramped, uncomfortable conditions that made long operations physically grueling. The early T-34s, for instance, had a two-man turret, forcing the commander to also act as the gunner, a significant tactical disadvantage that often led to poor situational awareness. But what they lacked in creature comforts, sophisticated doctrine, or initial training, they made up for in sheer tenacity, an almost fanatical determination, and a willingness to fight to the last man, often to the last breath. Their experiences on the front lines forged them into a unique fighting force, driven by a desperate patriotism, a burning desire for vengeance against an invading enemy that threatened their very existence, and a deep-seated belief in their cause, fueled by propaganda and personal loss. They were the collective protagonist of a war fought with unimaginable brutality, their steel machines becoming symbols of their unyielding spirit, a stark contrast to the more clinical professional approach of their German counterparts. The origins and formation of Soviet tank crews were often born out of extreme necessity and overwhelming urgency. With the German invasion, the Red Army faced catastrophic losses in men and material, far beyond anything anticipated by even the most pessimistic planners. Entire tank corps were annihilated in the opening weeks of Operation Barbarossa, leaving vast gaps in the Soviet armored forces. To replenish these losses, training programs were accelerated to an almost impossible degree, sometimes reducing months of instruction to mere weeks or even days before new crews were sent to the front. Many recruits came directly from collective farms or industrial factories, often with limited literacy and little to no prior military experience, let alone specialized armored warfare knowledge. They were taught the basics of driving, gunnery, and maintenance, often directly on the front lines under enemy fire, with damaged or captured equipment serving as training aids. This meant that while German crews benefited from extensive theoretical and practical training in dedicated academies, Soviet crews learned through the harsh, immediate realities of combat, where mistakes meant instant death and survival was the ultimate teacher. Resourcefulness and improvisation became a hallmark of their approach. They adapted quickly to the ever-changing battlefield conditions, often performing field repairs with scavenged parts and developing new tactics on the fly, sometimes out of sheer desperation. The emphasis was less on rigid, pre-planned doctrine and more on practical application, aggressive initiative, and sheer, unyielding determination to hold the line or push forward. This often led to unconventional, seemingly reckless tactics that surprised and deeply unnerved their German adversaries, who were accustomed to a more predictable, methodical style of warfare. The ideological indoctrination, emphasizing the defense of the socialist motherland against fascism, also played a significant role, instilling a powerful sense of duty and sacrifice. Early war experiences were unimaginably brutal for these nascent tank crews. The initial German onslaught, with its superior air support, coordinated combined arms tactics and experienced leadership, decimated Soviet armored formations. Thousands of tanks were lost, not only to enemy fire, but also to mechanical breakdowns, lack of fuel and poor logistical support, and countless crews perished in desperate, often futile, stands against overwhelming odds. Yet, from this devastation, a hardened core of survivors emerged. These veterans learned invaluable, albeit costly lessons about German tactics, the strengths and weaknesses of their own tanks, and the critical importance of coordinated action, even if it was often improvised and executed under extreme duress. They adapted their T-34s and KV-1s, often modifying them in the field to improve protection with additional armor plates welded on, or enhance firepower with captured weapons where possible. The development of new, more formidable tanks, such as the IS-2 heavy tank with its massive 122mm gun, provided them with increasingly potent weapons as the war progressed, reflecting the lessons learned in the crucible of combat. This period of intense, costly learning transformed the Soviet tank force from a disorganized, though numerically vast mass into a formidable, if still raw, fighting machine. They began to develop their own unique combat philosophy, one rooted in resilience, direct confrontation, and an unyielding refusal to yield ground, no matter the cost, often driven by a deep-seated desire for revenge for the destruction wrought upon their homeland. This evolution, forged in the fires of defeat and desperate struggle, led to a profound shift in the perception of Soviet tank crews. What began as a desperate, often suicidal resistance slowly matured into a potent offensive capability. The Germans, initially dismissive of the Untermenschen they faced, began to recognize a new, terrifying quality in their adversaries. The Soviet tank crews, having endured the worst of the Blitzkrieg and survived the initial onslaught, were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to push back, to reclaim every inch of their homeland, driven by a deep-seated desire for vengeance. Their desperation had transformed into a focused, aggressive energy that would soon define the Eastern Front and ultimately turn the tide of the war, making them a force to be reckoned with, and indeed feared. The German dilemma on the Eastern Front was profound and increasingly desperate. Their initial armored superiority, a cornerstone of their Blitzkrieg strategy, had been systematically eroded by the unexpected resilience, technological advancements, and sheer numerical strength of the Soviets. German tank commanders, who had once boasted of their panzers' invincibility and the superior training of their crews, now faced a growing, existential challenge. The rules of tank warfare, as they understood them from swift campaigns in the West, simply did not apply here. Soviet tank crews often disregarded conventional tactical wisdom, engaging in close-quarters brawls, ambushes from unexpected directions, and relentless frontal assaults that seemed to defy all logic and military prudence. This unpredictability, combined with the sheer numbers of Soviet tanks rolling off production lines and the often fanatical determination of their crews, forced the Germans to constantly adapt, often playing a losing game of catch-up in a brutal war of attrition they could not win. The psychological toll on German tank crews was immense, as they grappled with an enemy that seemed to defy logic, conventional military thought, and even the instinct for self-preservation, often fighting to the last man in a burning tank. This forced the Germans to rapidly develop new anti-tank weapons like the Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck, specifically designed to counter the T-34 and KV-1, a clear admission of their earlier technological shortcomings. A pivotal moment that exemplified this shift in fortunes and the terrifying effectiveness of Soviet tank crews occurred during the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, the largest tank battle in history. German forces launched Operation Citadel, a massive offensive designed to encircle and destroy Soviet forces in the Kursk salient, hoping to regain the strategic initiative lost after Stalingrad. The Soviet tank crews, however, were prepared. They had dug in, creating vast, multi-layered anti-tank defenses, including minefields, anti-tank ditches, and deeply echeloned artillery positions, and were ready to meet the German onslaught head-on. In the sprawling, dusty fields around Prokhorovka, a small village that would become synonymous with tank warfare, Soviet tank brigades, primarily equipped with T-34s, launched a massive counterattack against elite German panzer divisions, including units equipped with the new formidable Tiger and Panther tanks. This was not a cautious probing action, it was a full-scale aggressive charge, a deliberate attempt to close the distance and negate the superior long-range firepower of the German heavy tanks. The Soviet crews understood that in a close-range melee, their T-34s, with their superior speed, maneuverability, and lower profile, could outflank and overwhelm the slower, more heavily armored German machines, which were vulnerable at their sides and rear. This tactical insight, born of brutal experience, was a testament to their evolving battlefield intelligence. The action at Prokhorovka was a maelstrom of steel, fire, and human courage on an unprecedented scale. Soviet T-34s, often in waves, surged forward, their engines roaring, guns blazing, disregarding heavy losses and the devastating fire from German 88mm guns. German tank commanders reported seeing Soviet tanks, even after taking multiple hits, and with their turrets disabled, continuing their advance, attempting to ram enemy vehicles in desperate, suicidal acts of defiance. One particular engagement saw a Soviet T-34, its main gun jammed, deliberately ram a German Panzer IV, sacrificing itself to take out an enemy tank in a fiery explosion, a chilling example of their resolve. Another account described a Soviet tank crew, their vehicle burning fiercely after being hit, bailing out only to engage German infantry with their submachine guns, fighting to the last breath rather than surrendering. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning fuel, cordite and scorched earth. Tank turrets spun frantically, seeking targets amidst the smoke and dust. Shells ricocheted off armor with terrifying screeches, sending sparks flying and shrapnel tearing through the air, creating a deafening symphony of destruction. The Soviet crews, often operating with minimal radio communication, relied on instinct, aggressive initiative, and a deep, almost symbiotic understanding of their machines and their comrades. They would use every undulation of the terrain to their advantage, appearing suddenly from hull-down positions, firing a quick shot, and then repositioning before the Germans could respond effectively. Their tactics were often crude, but brutally effective, designed to sow chaos, overwhelm the enemy through sheer audacity, and maintain relentless pressure, turning the battlefield into a deadly, chaotic arena where courage and tenacity often trumped technological sophistication and methodical planning. The sheer volume of Soviet tanks, combined with the unwavering resolve of their crews, created a psychological barrier that even the most hardened German veterans found difficult to overcome. The immediate result of such encounters was a profound and lasting psychological impact on the German forces, reinforcing a growing, chilling fear of their Soviet adversaries. This fear was not just of their numbers or their machines, but of their seemingly boundless will to fight, a determination that transcended conventional military logic. The repercussions of the Soviet tank crew's effectiveness were far-reaching, contributing significantly to the irreversible turning tide of the Eastern Front. The German strategic failures, particularly at Stalingrad and Kursk, were in no small part due to the unexpected resilience, aggressive capabilities, and sheer fighting spirit of Soviet armored forces. German commanders, who had once boasted of their panzers' invincibility and the superior training of their doctrine, now faced an enemy that not only matched them in numbers, but often surpassed them in sheer fighting spirit and a willingness to endure unimaginable hardship and sacrifice. The psychological warfare aspect was subtle but potent. The relentless advance of Soviet tanks, even when damaged or burning, created a narrative of an unstoppable, almost elemental force that seemed to defy destruction. This fear permeated the ranks of the Wehrmacht, from the common soldier to the highest generals, impacting morale, strategic decision-making, and ultimately contributing to their defeat. The German war machine, designed for swift, decisive victories, found itself bogged down in a brutal war of attrition, constantly battling an enemy that refused to break, refused to surrender, and fought with a ferocity born of defending their homeland against an existential threat. The Soviet tank armies formed from these hardened crews became the spearhead of the Red Army's massive offensives, driving relentlessly westward. The historical impact of these tank crews is immense and undeniable. Their courage, tenacity, and sacrifice were instrumental in halting the German advance, absorbing the initial shock of Barbarossa, and ultimately pushing the Wehrmacht back across thousands of kilometers to Berlin. They demonstrated that even against a technologically superior and initially more experienced foe, determination, rapid adaptation, and an unyielding will to fight could prevail against overwhelming odds. Their contribution to the Soviet victory, and thus to the Allied victory in World War II, cannot be overstated. They became a powerful symbol of Soviet strength and resilience, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure and overcome in the face of unimaginable adversity. Their legacy is deeply etched into the history of armored warfare, showcasing a unique blend of desperation, battlefield innovation, and raw fighting power that fundamentally reshaped the battlefield and influenced military doctrine for decades to come. The T-34 in particular became one of the most iconic and influential tank designs in history, a direct result of the lessons learned and the demands placed upon it by its crews, proving that simplicity, robustness, and effective firepower could outmatch more complex designs. Their tactics, initially born of necessity, evolved into a sophisticated doctrine of deep operations, emphasizing massed tank assaults and rapid exploitation of breakthroughs. Life after the war for many of these tank crews was often one of quiet heroism, sometimes overshadowed by the broader political narratives and the immense scale of the Soviet Union's victory. Many returned to their devastated homes and communities, bearing the profound physical and psychological scars of the conflict. Their stories, while celebrated within the Soviet Union as heroes of the Great Patriotic War, were often less known or understood in the West, obscured by the Iron Curtain and Cold War politics. Yet, their experiences and the brutal lessons learned from their battles profoundly influenced post-war tank doctrine and military strategy globally, shaping the development of armored forces for generations. The image of the Soviet tank crew, tenacious, unyielding, and willing to sacrifice everything, remains a powerful and enduring symbol of the Eastern Front's brutal, decisive, and ultimately victorious struggle against Nazism, a testament to the human cost and ultimate triumph of an entire nation. Their legacy serves as a stark reminder of the immense sacrifices made and the indomitable spirit required to confront and defeat tyranny. This is the true legacy of the Soviet tank crews. The proof that even in the darkest times, when everything seems lost and the world tells you that you are defeated, a few determined individuals can change history. One tank at a time, one desperate charge at a time, and in doing so, prove that the human spirit, tempered by suffering, ignited by righteous anger, and fueled by an unshakable will, is stronger than any propaganda, stronger than any numerical superiority, stronger than any war machine.